Well, hopefully you guys have had a good time so far in Chicago. I'm just kind of curious, how many of you went to a Cubs game? Other than the people that went with me? Nobody. How many of you went and got good deep dish pizza? Okay.
Well, now we know where the Penn money went.
And how many of you went to Portillo's for Italian beef sandwiches or hot dogs? All right, so you guys can consider this week a failure then, because you didn't do all the things you should have done. Hopefully I can redeem you with this session here. Thank you for coming, I appreciate it. My name is Jason Lesnick. I'm a director of product marketing in our server and tools division, where we focus on our solution for consumerization of IT, enabling organizations to let their users choose their devices responsibly and still be productive with applications. And I've got Shamagan with me as well. He's going to be diving into an important component of our story, which is our RDS, Remote Desktop Service capabilities, the second half of our session. So I'm going to kind of give you an overview of mobile device management, access, and information protection, and then how the remote desktop capabilities fits into that. I'm from Chicago. I moved out to Seattle 9 years ago, so that's how I had kind of like the hidden secrets as to where to go. So, you know, at the very beginning of the week, Brian was up and he was kind of giving this whole 8-bit talk, and you know, we're going retro this week and everything like that. And I was watching the session and I'm thinking to myself, you know, the 8-bit world really can be put into context with consumerization of IT. And if you take a look back over the years, where we've come in computing has happened over a relatively long period of time. I mean, 30 years ago, you know, we were talking about how laser discs, super chips, and more are going to be the new technologies that change your life. Who remembers the Model 25? Nobody. I'm not that old. Come on. Wow. Okay. And of course, the Commodore 64. So this was all 30 years ago. If you take a look back at the state-of-the-art equipment that we had back then, who could forget the chiclet keyboard from the Atari? Of course, we have the Apple IIe, the Trash 80. That was the first computer I worked on. That was more than 30 years ago. So clearly, we've come a long way. My wristwatch has more capabilities than those things probably do. Just in the past three and a half years, all of a sudden, all of that has changed with computing, personal computing, where people are bringing their home devices into work, or the devices that they expect to be able to just bring in an iPad, a smartphone, and then give it to you and say, well, all right, make it work. And I remember the first time the iPads came out, when we talked to customers, they're like, you know what, my CEO, my CIO told me, make this work. I don't care about security, I want my email on it, just make it work. And it was a really big shift, because back before that, if you remember Blaster and Ninda and all those other fun things that I'm sure some of you spent a couple hours on trying to resolve, it was all about security and lockdown and all those other things. And you know, the really interesting thing about it is that if you go back to the older type of computer, if you remember any of these things, nobody really wanted to bring in you know, all these home PCs that were there. I mean, Microsoft and Citrix haven't released a remote desktop client for the Commodore 64 yet. So all of these older things are just kind of gone by the wayside. And this generation is kind of used to having that locked down device that we typically have today. But really not anymore. Now, the expectations are that the users are going to be able to kind of choose whatever device that they want. They're going to be able to have those devices access the same applications that you offered up at work, or worse, they're going to choose similar applications that are free or they pay for themselves up on all of the different application stores and have them work, and then you risk all the security issues with all of that stuff. And they, of course, expect all of their devices and all of their apps that they choose to use to access all the corporate data. And so as you can see, consumerization of IT is a mess. You have to try to figure out what all of the different permutations are going to be. And there's three types of organizations out there. There's what we call, there's the people that just flat out say, no, we're not going to allow this. In most cases, I don't think they realize how deep consumerization has already taken place in their organization. Forrester, IDC, Gartner have all done studies. First they interview IT, and then they interview end users. And the same question, how many people in your organization take their personal computer or personal devices and bring them into the organization and access resources? Vastly different answers between IT and end users. And so, the second one is the one that is fully embracing consumerization and saying, yes, we're going to work with the end users. We're going to help them choose devices if possible, make recommendations. We're going to put infrastructure in place to allow this to happen with security. And then the third one is what we call the ostrich. The head is in the sand. I don't want to know about it. If it happens, just, let's hope that nothing bad happens with it. And so we talk about helping to enable consumerization, but do it responsibly. If you've ever been to San Francisco, I'm sure you've been on a trolley. And if you've ever been on a trolley, I'm sure that you've had some nice, interesting experiences with it. I think consumerization is like a trolley. There's three options that you have. You can either try to stand in front of it, and you'll end up underneath it. You can get on it, sit down, and ride safely. Or you can hang off the side and be partially on it, and then have your leg clipped off by a car that's driving right next to you. So you need to really enable and embrace consumerization because, frankly, it's happening anyways. You may or may not know about it. And so we're here today to talk about what Microsoft is offering. I was in one of the sessions yesterday, and one of the panel members was a consultant, and he made a comment about how shocking it is that Microsoft is kind of embracing consumerization and the cross-platform support. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So our goal is to try to make sense of this, but really focus on consumerization, not just around mobile device management. Every time I talk to customers, they say, how is Microsoft able to help me manage my iPads? What configuration settings? Can you block the camera? Can you do this? And frankly, I'm really blunt with our customers. Microsoft doesn't have a mobile device management product, and we really don't intend on making a mobile device management product. And I'll explain why. The first part is that we know that users want to use different devices, and we want to help enable them to do that, and again, do it in a manner that can be managed. But the second part is around making sure that you can leverage the infrastructure that you have and the knowledge that you have in terms of what you're already doing today around PC and Mac and server management. And that's why we say that we don't have a mobile device management product. We have management products that manage all devices. Why treat a mobile device any differently? You already have infrastructure to inventory, to configure policies, to distribute software, if you're using Configuration Manager, for example. And so we have what we call unified device management. It's just another device, and you go in, and you're able to kind of see what's there, and I'll drill into that in more details. I have twins at home. I have a boy and a girl. I don't treat them or manage or parent them differently just because they're somewhat differently. I still apply the same parenting concepts to them. So I kind of think of it that way. And the third part is around protecting the data. It's really important as you take a look at how to bring in devices like iPads, Android devices, Windows RT devices, all those other devices that you have. It's not just about managing the device. If you take a look at it, in different countries, there's different rules, for example, around what you can and cannot do with devices. In the UK, for example, there's a law that says that an organization cannot do a wipe of a personal device. It's a personal device. So, number one, there's certain things that you just simply cannot do on a device because each platform is fundamentally different. There's different rules, not only with how the operating system works, but also how applications can be downloaded, made available and downloaded through the store. If you've ever tried to work with applications from Apple, for example, they have a very well-defined structure for what applications can and cannot do. One of them happens to be a third-party application catalog cannot be in the Apple Store. And they've actually removed products from the App Store that function like that. Also, if a device is a personal device, the user might not want to or block certain things from happening. I don't want you to inventory all of my software on my device. You don't need to know that I use Wells Fargo as my bank or that I play Angry Birds, things like that. I don't want you to disable the camera on my phone because I happen to use that phone to take pictures of my family. So there's the ownership of that as well. You need to be able to manage applications, and there's been sessions throughout the week about like app wrapping capabilities, take an unmanaged app and apply policy around it. That's a great method. That's the next step beyond mobile device management. It's called mobile application management. And then finally, at the end of the day, it's really about the data. I don't really care about the device. If you lose it, that's unfortunate. You spent a lot of money on it. You'll have to buy another one. I want to make sure that the data is protected. And it really is a cat and mouse game between end users and IT. If you block me from doing this, I'm just going to do that. If you give me a containerized email application, you better make sure that you're also blocking Outlook web access, because I'll just try to do it that way. I'll just take a document and I'll put it up on, well, I guess we can't call it SkyDrive anymore, but I'll put it up on Dropbox or someplace else. So it's always a cat and mouse game, but at the end of the day, it's this that's going to get you on the front page of the New York Times if your CIO or your CEO loses their iPad in an airplane. So we try to focus the conversation more on a holistic approach, taking a look at consumerization and the way that you actually enable users to access applications and data on any type of device. And so if we drill down into the three areas, and I'm only going to spend a little bit of time on each because I want to let Shamagan have a lot of time talking about what's new with our remote desktop capabilities, because that's a big focus of these sessions here. Three main points. Enabling a consistent experience for users, regardless of the devices that they choose. If I have applications available to me, I want that to look relatively consistent across my Windows device. If I have a Mac, if I've got an iPad, etc., I should have a consistent view of that. I should be able to take that device and get into the system easily. And the system is the management system to be able to get the apps I want, and then also from an access point of view, and I'll describe those in a little bit. And then also be able to connect to resources automatically if possible. So how do some of these things work? Our main tenet in terms of managing cross-platform is to leverage the management capabilities within the device itself. If you take a look at iOS, for example, you can't really create a very deep management protocol that goes across the entire operating system. It breaks the rules of the store, and it really fundamentally, from the way that the platform is developed, everything is very containerized. On the flip side of that, Android is wide open. It's Wild West. And there's all sorts of things in between. So our goal is to leverage the management capabilities within the operating system. So Windows RT, Windows Phone 8 has a management API that's based on the OMA-DM protocol. And so we leverage what those operating systems let us do. We work with Apple's management protocols. So whatever Apple lights up to say you can enable this or disable it or configure, we'll be able to do within Windows Intune and System Center Configuration Manager. Up until now, we've been using Exchange ActiveSync. That's always kind of the baseline. I don't consider that a management protocol. I wouldn't use it for management at all. But that's basically what Android has built in with their email client. So what we're actually going to do, we're breaking our rule one time in this next release of ConfigMan and Intune, and these are coming out in Q4. And we'll actually be building an OMA-DM-based client for Android. So you'll be able to manage Android devices with a little bit more depth than just Exchange ActiveSync. So that helps enable users to choose their devices. And then we have concepts of enrolling and registering devices into your infrastructure. Enrolling means I can go and take my device and make it manageable. So if you're on a Windows Phone 8, for example, if you go into the settings, there's scroll down and there's something for company apps. And that basically lets you log on to your corporate system, your email name and your password, and that will light up the company portal and you'll see whatever applications are available to you. Windows 8.1 has it built in. Or you can go to a web page or download, for example, you will be able to download from the App Store for Apple, Windows Intune's company portal. You run it, you log on, and it's real simple, and you're in. The next concept is something new, and we're going to start this out with Windows 8.1 and Windows RT 8.1, and then we'll have it with iOS and Android and probably down-level Windows at a later time. This lets the device actually get registered in Active Directory. And what that allows you to do is grant or block access from that device to certain internal applications that you publish. I'll get into that in a little bit. So once the users get into the company portal, then they have access to the applications. Whatever you've published through System Center, Configuration Manager, if it's applicable to that device, they'll have access to it. And it could either be a native application, either side-loaded, or it can be an application from the company store. So we'll point you, the App Store, so we'll point the user to that and they can pull down the application. Or you can publish web links. So if I have an internal expense application, for example, I can put a bookmark down on that device so that they click on it, it'll automatically go through, and then potentially, depending on how you have it set up, go through a firewall. We'll have the ability in Windows Server 2012 R2 that you could publish through a web application proxy. So the application is internal, but you're authenticating the device in. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But regardless, I'm publishing a bookmark down to that device, and the user can access that internal application. Or, of course, it could be a remote desktop application, whether it's a full desktop, and obviously that's not the most optimal thing in the world, or just the application itself. We have the choice of many of those, including VDI sessions, and we'll dig into that in a lot more detail. But the goal is that I'm getting the user enrolled easily on the device that they choose, and very quickly they can see their applications that are available to them. So the second part is really around unifying the environment, leveraging what you already have from a configuration manager point of view, your Active Directory services capability, and then really kind of being able to dig into the settings management of those different devices. So as I mentioned before, I don't consider our offerings to be a mobile device management product. I view that as being a point solution. You probably already have a management infrastructure already in place. I'm going to focus on System Center. And you already have your best practices. You've got the infrastructure. Your IT users understand and have the skills on how to use the product itself, System Center. And you may have been using it for a long time. And so the benefits of having everything integrated is, number one, from a policy point of view, and also from a reporting and a compliance and an attestation point of view. In System Center 2012 Configuration Manager, we introduced a capability to have applications dynamically delivered to a user based on the different devices that they have. In the past, we've deployed an application to a device. Now what we can do, if I wanted to offer up an application to Shamagan, let's say I want him to run Skype. I'm going to make sure that he has access to Skype. So his expectation is that whichever device he happens to use, he should have Skype. And so if it's his Windows laptop, I've already downloaded the MSI package. I'm going to give that to him and install it through the MSI package. I'll have another rule to say if he's on his iPad, because he's an iPad user, here's the link to the Skype application in the App Store. If he wants to use Skype on his iPad, go and just click on it and it will install. If he's on his Android phone, here's the link in Google Play. But regardless, he should expect that he has Skype, and then I'm just defining the rules as to how Skype should be accessed. I might have it be accessed through application virtualization. If he's logging on the corporate network, but for example, he's borrowing my PC, and I have a different version of Skype, I don't want it to overwrite my version, so we can identify the fact that he's not logging on to his main PC, give it to him a different way. Or I can say, you know what, it doesn't run on the device that he has, have it execute through a remote app session. So we have that flexibility already, and now we can extend it to the multiple devices. Again, having two separate tools to do that kind of breaks that model. Now, if I wanted to get a report on all of the devices and applications that he has, I could pull a report on him, and I'll see he's got a PC, he's got the iPad, he's got his Android phone, and he's got Skype and all these other applications on it. Again, single unified infrastructure. Now he could see all the devices that he has. It doesn't matter whether it's a mobile device or not. Now, the way that we do this is through two products that we actually sell together now. We license together, and we have tight integration between the two. We have System Center Configuration Manager, which is the in-depth, on-premise, infrastructure required, IT knowledge required, PC, Mac, and server management. And you could do OS deployment and apply policies, software distribution, inventory, etc. And then we also have Windows Intune, and this is purely a cloud-based management service. It's a subscription service, and basically there's kind of two ways that Intune works. There's Intune standalone, just use it in the cloud. It's mainly positioned for small, mid-sized businesses. It supports about 7,000 devices per tenant. If you are a larger organization and you have branch offices, for example, that aren't really connected and you want to just manage them separately, or if you're doing a merger and acquisition and you want to reach out and touch those devices quickly, you could use Intune standalone. By combining the two together, and basically you go into ConfigMan and you link it to your Intune subscription, well, now you can think of ConfigMan being extended into the cloud. And our view is that devices should be managed in the world that they live. A PC or a Mac is typically corporate connected. It's on the network, whether it's physically on the network or VPN or whatever the case might be. A phone or an iPad is typically connected from T-Mobile or Starbucks in general. And so as you use the single administration console, which is ConfigMan, once you link the two, you don't even have to think about Intune anymore. You're setting your policies. Give Skype to Shamagon. If it's going to be installed on a PC, Configuration Manager goes and delivers it. If it's a cloud-based device like a phone, it passes those instructions to Intune, and Intune deals with it from the cloud, and then everything gets reported back in and munged together from a ConfigMan point of view.
Is it cloud only?
Is what cloud only?
The Intune, can we have that service deployed on premises?
The question was, is Intune a cloud-only service, or can you have like your own version of Intune? The answer is it's cloud-only. So it's.
Your cloud is like a prison-friendly, you know. So
I'm sorry?
your cloud is prison-friendly, you know. So therefore, I prefer to have everything on premises, you know.
Yes, that's a fair point. So the question was about Prism, and I can't get into that too much because I'm not in our security group. There's no PII information that we store in Intune. We actually have a white paper. We store the inventory information of the device, but there's no personal information about the user or anything like that. But yes, if you've got security requirements, then obviously then you need to kind of fit that into your overall strategy. So that's basically that. Once you get the devices configured, I mentioned both of these can apply policies. So within Configuration Manager, you can have desired configuration management on a PC or on a Mac. You also have the configuration settings. This is always that checklist box of can you do this, can you do that, locking things down on an iPad, for example. And in our release that we're doing in the fall, we have much broader depth of configuration settings, and we'll have that list published shortly as we're going through the development cycle. And we also have the ability to deploy certificates, VPN, and wireless network profiles. So again, I'm doing this all from the ConfigMan console, and I can apply those rules both on your PCs as well as on your iPads at the same time. So really what happens is that the IT department can manage the entire device and application lifecycle, getting them enrolled, inventorying what's there, distributing software, pulling software if needed, and retiring a device. And either the user or the IT organization could do a retire of the device, do the selective wipe, whatever the case might be. So finally, before I hand this off, and again, this is the most important point, and this goes beyond mobile device management. It's really the area around protecting the data. And there's a couple things that are in Intune and ConfigMan, but a lot of these things are really in the functionality of your network and your file shares and things like that. So it's really talking about what we're doing in Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server 2012 R2.
Can we just
Yeah,
be clear?
sure.
It's not about protecting data. It's about compliance. And those are 100% totally different. Okay? Don't even try and fool me otherwise.
Well, I'm not trying to fool you. I think that part of being compliant is to prove that people, only the people that should have access to data, have access to the data.
You cannot prove that. If I take the device with some Android malware, it's going where I want it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
You cannot stop it.
Okay.
So don't even try and advance that argument. I totally get the compliance argument. We need it, but it's not security.
Okay. I'm not saying security. I'm saying protection. You need to protect it as much as you can. I mean, any house that you have has a lock on the door. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to be able to break into it through a window or dig a tunnel underneath the house and get in through the basement.
EMM is about compliance.
Correct.
Great, let's go.
Okay. I'll continue down the path of protecting the data because there are technologies that we have to help protect the data itself. The first part is around giving people access to the data from multiple devices. Now again, to this gentleman's point, it is a cat and a mouse game. We will never come out and say we will secure your data. And I hope that no other vendor will come out and say we will secure your data, because very obviously there's ways to, in the long run, break into data. And so you do what you can. We've always believed in defense in depth, whether it's in the operating system, our file servers, etc. So the first part is giving people access to the data. Now again, from a cat and mouse point of view, users are going to save their data where they want, unfortunately. It used to be, you know what, I have a group policy, I'm using NetWare, I'm going to set these rules to say that this is your home drive, I'm going to redirect your data to that home drive on the server, and I'm going to apply access control lists to every other part of the hard drive, so you physically cannot write data to that device. In Windows Vista, we introduced the capability to block people from using USB devices and things like that. But then you have Gmail and Hotmail and SkyDrive and Dropbox and Box.net and all of these other services that will still allow people to access data and break the security model, break the compliance model as well. So again, you have to look at things as the amount of risk you're willing to accept for your users. And not every user is the same, obviously. Your CEO probably has a lot more information on it than a call center worker working from home. And so there's different ways to give access to data. So the first part is being able to allow data to be physically on that device. And so people put stuff up onto cloud-based services because it's simple. And in certain companies, depending on the relationship users have with IT, I think that if IT comes out with a recommendation and say, we'll give you this, please use this, in most cases, users are going to do that. I'm not naive and say that that's going to happen all the time, but for example, if I bought everyone in my company a Box.net corporate account where I can actually apply some rules to that data, I think that most people would probably say, okay, well, you know, cool, Box.net, simple, you know, it plugs into the browser or whatever, and I can go with it. But that's not always the case. So in Windows 8.1 and Windows Server 2012 R2, and again, afterwards we'll have also for iOS and for other platforms as well, we have a concept of work folders. What work folders is a special share that you set up on the server, and then you can associate it with the user, and then when users put files into that, it will automatically sync down onto their registered device, their enrolled device that has the work folders. And it's in a container. So on iOS, the work folders app will be a container. If you delete or you delete the app or you unenroll the device, that data goes away. It's an encrypted folder on Windows, so you do a selective wipe, it breaks the key, and the access to the data won't be able to be used anymore. So that's one mechanism. It's certainly not the mechanism to use. Just another tool in your tool belt, so to speak. Desktop virtualization, many people think of as a great way of delivering an application to a device that can't run it. It's also a way to deliver an application to a device that shouldn't run it. So if it's a specific application with the finance data on it. Even though you might even have a rich Windows PC or a Mac, I don't want you to have that application or the data on that application physically on the device itself. So in the case of the comptroller, for example, I'm going to let you have access to that application, the data, but it's going to be running through remote desktop services. So if you lose the device, you're just physically not going to be able to, you don't have to worry about it because the data is not on that device. Then there's also access policy to be able to get to these devices from the cloud. In Windows Server 2012 R2, we have this feature called the Web Application Proxy. What this lets you do is publish an internal application, a web-based app. So for example, Microsoft, almost all of our applications are web-based. Our MS Expense Report system, our HR system, all of those things are web-based. And so our IT department can take that MS Expense app and publish it through the Web Application Proxy. And as I mentioned with ConfigMan and Server 2000, ConfigMan and Windows Intune, I can put that bookmark on the device. So here's the MS Expense application. When I click on that application, that link, it will actually drive me through the web proxy. Now with the web proxy, I can, if I wanted to, just let it pass through, and if the application has authentication mechanisms, pop up a different user ID and password, I could do that as a user if IT wants me to. We also have the concept of multi-factor authentication, and it's an extensible infrastructure, so you could go out and get RSA and others as well. One method that you could do it through Windows Technologies is we acquired a company called Phone Factor several months ago. And what Phone Factor will do, and that's not the final name, it'll be something Windows Azure something, we haven't finalized the name, is that I can register the device but have it call back my cell phone or have me enter in a PIN, whatever the case might be. As I'm registering the device into the system, into Active Directory, I can also have it do that same mechanism when I try to go and access that application. So I'm making sure that it's the user because I'm actually calling another one of the user's devices and requiring a PIN, for example, or do a preset PIN. The other way, as I mentioned before, this concept of workplace join. What workplace join does when I register my device is it creates an object in Active Directory. It's not a security principle, so it's not a domain joined PC, but it creates an object and it will have information about the user and information about the device. So it's Shamagon's Surface device, or his iOS device when we release that support. Now, when I publish that MS Expense report through the proxy, I can say I want multi-factor authentication, and the way that I want to do it is to make sure, is that device registered? Is it trusted because I have that object defining it in Active Directory? And it will look and say, well, okay, it's his iPad and it's him. So if I were to borrow his iPad, I log on through the company portal, I get the MS Expense application, I click on it, it will actually block me because it's not him on his device, it's me on his device. So there's several different ways that you can have this multi-factor authentication capability when you're enabling access from the cloud on a non-managed device. Obviously, if it's a domain-joined device, it's a totally different concept that has much more depth on it. But these devices can't be domain-joined. So that's another mechanism of being able to get those PCs, or those devices, I should say, into applications. You could do this with SharePoint, you could do it with Exchange. So whatever you want to publish out, you can do it that way and add additional authentication mechanisms to it. And then, of course, remote desktop capabilities as well. If it's an important application, regardless of whether it will physically run on that device or not, I want the data off of that device. I want the application off of that device because the application itself might have some intellectual property. Give them access to it, put that icon down, but have them run it, and you don't have to worry about the data or the application because it's just not on that device itself. So that's one step to give them access and making sure that they're who they say that they are on that device. What can you do with the data itself? And this is the case about how can I protect it, if I'm going to take that data off of the device, off of the servers, now it's on Dropbox, etc. Again, I talk about this concept of defense in depth. What can you do at each layer, and knowing that it's a cat and a mouse game? So one of the capabilities that we can do on file servers, well, let me take a step back. We have a concept called rights management. It's DRM basically for Office documents. It's an open API. We have an SDK for it, so third parties can leverage it as well. There's a company called Foxit that does Adobe Acrobat type of documents that can apply DRM. We need more third-party support for sure. It's not ubiquitous yet, but that capability we're trying to build up. And basically what happens is that the user will recognize the fact that this document is really important. I don't want other people to access it or cut or paste, whatever the case might be. And so I'm going to push this button in Word, or if it's an email in Outlook, and I'm going to apply a template that says, for example, in our case, Microsoft full-time employees only. Vendors can't see it, and they can't forward it on, they can't print it, they can't take a screenshot. Now the problem with that is that how many of you would think about doing that if it's a really important document?
Man, but they can always take a screenshot with that.
Absolutely. And again, it's defense in depth, it's a cat and mouse game. If someone wants to steal it, they could take a camera and they could take a shot, etc. Those are the people that are going to find a way regardless. And then there's the people that you want to kind of protect from themselves, the typical user. And so the problem is the typical user doesn't typically think, oh wow, this is really important, I should make sure that nobody sees it, that shouldn't see it. And so the rights management capability is much more diminished because you're relying on the user to think to do it. So in Server, we have a capability called dynamic access control. And what this allows you to do as users save their data to shares, SharePoint, file shares, etc., you can define rules and will interrogate the file through the indexing service and to find out if the rules apply. So for example, if Shamagan has his specs for the remote desktop capabilities in the next 3 versions of Windows, and he has the word Windows 9, whatever, or he's got the word Microsoft Confidential in it, if there's something that looks like a social security number in it, when he saves that file, we'll automatically apply that read-only, don't cut and paste, don't forward on, can't print, whatever the case might be. So as a user, he didn't think about it, but as an IT department, we did, and we automatically put it out there. So the benefit of that is that now that I've automatically applied that document rights management to it, if he decides to put it in his work folder, downloads the file to his Surface RT device, puts it on his Android device, decides to copy it up to Dropbox, that file is physically available. There's no security per se to block someone from, like if he puts in his shared folder on Dropbox, it's there. But someone that downloads the file and tries to open it, and it'll go back to your internal rights management servers or an online version of it, they have to authenticate. They can't, and so even though I have physical access to the file, I can't actually see the internals of that file. So again, it's defense in depth, it's playing the cat and mouse game, but it's another advantage to being able to help try to protect that data as much as possible.
What product is that all in? Can you just make that picture?
So the capability is called Rights Management Services. Yeah. It's built into Windows Server. It does require an additional license. It's not part of the Windows Server client access license, very similar to how like Remote Desktop Services has a license for that. It's been in Windows Server for a while. The dynamic access control capabilities is a new feature in Windows Server 2012. The DAC is the new feature. And in 2012 R2, we actually have much stronger audit capabilities. So you can report on who accessed the file at what time, what did they do with it, if it was declined, why was it declined. It's all claims-based. So what that means, what that means is that you can have a claim to say, for example, this person tried to access the file, but because they accessed the file off of the corporate network, I'm not going to let them use it. And then I'll flag that. So it's not just about how do I dynamically protect the data based on what's in the document, but also how can I dynamically protect the data about how it's trying to be accessed. So if Shamagan's trying to access the file, it's his file, he has full rights to it. If he's on his corporate PC on the corporate network, I'm going to let him use it. If he's on his Mac at home and he VPNs in and he tries to access the file, I'm not going to let him use it, because I'm requiring that he's using it only on the domain join PC that we gave him. So it's very dynamic, not just in flagging the content, but also protecting based on how people are trying to access it.
What would the approach be, or is there an approach if we need to do that, take external parties into account? So if you want to share with external parties.
Yeah, so the external parties is something that we're working on. I can't share a lot about it right now, but you'll be hearing a lot more about it in the upcoming months. It is an important problem. I've personally faced the problem myself. I had created some competitive content for our field, and they wanted to share it with partners of ours, and unfortunately all of our partners aren't in our Active Directory network, so I had to non-DRM it, and it appeared on someone's website. So it's definitely a problem, and it's really only limited internally right now, but we'll be giving some great solutions for that in the future, leveraging Windows Azure.
This is predicated on Windows Server as the file store, correct?
Correct. Well, no. So the dynamic access control is something that's a part of the file server in Windows Server, so to interrogate the file, to see what's in it, and then apply the template. You can...
Get stuck with the shitty DLP stuff, which is which is basically throwing a regex stuff. It's just terrible. I mean, I like the metadata stuff in that. That's much richer, and it's expected to be same. But trying to run regex over context is terrible.
Yeah, I can't really get into that much depth about that. I'm not as familiar with what you're trying to describe.
It's just that all the DLP solutions from the security vendors are ghastly for that very reason.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's any specific vendor out there that solves every single problem.
But you can on Windows Server 12 with that, because then you've got this awesome metadata you can attach to the object, right?
It's the metadata that's in the object, and it's the data itself, yeah. Yeah. And again, it's just additional tools. You're probably going to have to use multiple things to solve. Consumerization is not an easy thing. I actually view consumerization... Anyone here work for a pharmaceutical company? So it takes you a long time to test a drug, right? I think consumerization is like a brand new drug. It seems to work fine, but until I've had that drug in my system for 15 years, I'm really not going to know if I've just caused myself a lot of liver problems. I think consumerization is the same way. We're all kind of learning what we can do, what we can't do, the cat and mouse game, the defense in depth, and the technology overall within the industry has a lot to improve. And DLP, I think, is the really critical part of that still needs to come across.
The context you talked about, is that a function of the DRM client, or is that a function of some other?
Do you mind if I switch?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. So there's a client, obviously, on the device that recognizes, okay, I can't open this file, I need to go back and authenticate. And there are rights management clients outside of Microsoft. So for example, Outlook is DRM enabled, rights management enabled. If you're using Windows RT or iOS or Android, there's a great email application called Touchdown from a company called NitroDesk. They support the DRM as well, so I can actually rights manage an email that I send internally. If someone sends me one that's rights managed, I can open it up in that application as well. So there's a client part going back to the server.
What about the context of this is my home device versus this is a work device? Is that part of the, the client part of Intune, or?
No, it's not part of Intune. It's part of either the operating system or like there's an ActiveX control that would download automatically for Internet Explorer, for example, to say, hey, this is a rights-protected email if I'm going through OA, and it'll go through and open it up based on the ActiveX. I think it's an ActiveX control. So it's extensible. Other people can build clients for it as well. Let me hand it off to Shamagan. I think you need to add this as well.
And by the way, a coincidence, Snowden shows up there. I didn't do that on purpose. When you're talking about data and security, Snowden shows up there.
Yeah, it could be a lot worse. All right. Here.
Okay, fantastic. Let me make sure I've got my rig wired up
You need to put this
for the clicker.
into- let's see. I'm not sharing this with you.
Go ahead. I've got a demo rig in here. Let me just make sure I've got the connection wired up so that once we get going, we don't need to start. Okay. Got it, I think. Let's quickly go past this. Okay, fantastic. So before I start, a quick show of hands. Who here is familiar with 2012 and the capabilities that we shipped with 2012? Like that way I can pace my session. Okay, I can roughly see like 30 or 40% of the hands go up. So I'm going to take a little bit of time, very quickly talk about what we shipped with 2012, the scenarios that it enables, the deployment choices that you have, and then I want to spend most of the time that we have in showing some of the cool demos with 2012 R2. I've also have a list of sessions that people like Claudio, Rick, and Sean and Benny that they've been doing in this BriForum. So I'll recommend you to go watch those recordings of those sessions for an in-depth understanding of some of the topics that we're going to talk about as well. So before I go further, one of the questions that I've gotten a lot in the last couple of days is many of you stopped by the booth and were asking, look, I've been doing RDS for a while. Now, how is VDI different from RDS? What are the set of technologies in Windows Server that enable me to do VDI? And what are the use cases when I should be doing VDI versus RDS? The way we've engineered the system and what RDS in Windows Server lets you do is VDI is no different. In fact, VDI, or what you might have heard of VDI, is just a deployment choice that Remote Desktop Services components in Windows Server enables you to do. You can deploy Remote Desktop Services with Windows Server, and you can do one of these three deployment models. You can do the traditional terminal server or remote desktop session host server model, or you can go down the route of using client SKU VMs running on Hyper-V and deliver a single desktop session or apps running in those sessions to your users. And in fact, it's not an either-or choice. Depending on your use case and user needs, you can have a mix and match of these deployment models. For a significant set of your users, you could do sessions, and for specific use cases where you need either a pooled VM model or a personal VM model, you could do that. There's no difference in technology. It's the same stack. It is Windows Server, Hyper-V, File Server, and the Remote Desktop Services components. In fact, all the other software, including RemoteFX, the protocol, the client software, everything is the same when it comes to Windows Server and RDS. So with that, again, I think most of you might be familiar with this, but to quickly recap, while the three models are very similar, there are scenarios where one model works better than the other. If you think about sessions, they're the most cost effective. You can have the maximum density for your hardware. You can pack more number of sessions than what you would be able to do with the other models. That also means you have fewer OS instances running, and that reduces your management cost and overhead. But at the same time, you're not going to be able to provide your users with admin access so that they can go and customize, install their own applications, or personalize it. That said, it doesn't mean there's no personalization possible. We've got technologies like folder redirection, roaming profiles, and with Windows Server 2012, there's something called user profile disks that enables you to enable a certain level of personalization even with sessions. Users won't be able to install applications, but they'll be able to store their data, do personalization with their remote desktop sessions. Pooled VMs, the way I think about it, it's very similar to sessions, but it addresses one of the issues around app compatibility. If you've got certain applications that are not going to work with session host server, then pooled VMs is your answer. Pooled VMs enables you to have one VM instance serving a particular user at any point in time. You still don't have a dedicated VM for every single user that you need to support. There's a pool of virtual machines, and when a user connects to it, depending on availability, he's routed to one of the virtual machines. Again, the same personalization technologies that you can use for sessions also apply to pooled VMs. You can do roaming user profiles. You can do folder redirection. You can also do user profile disks so that you can enable personalization with pooled VMs. In terms of cost effectiveness, it is not as cost effective as RDS is, but I think the gap is closing. With some of the improvements that we are seeing around storage, some of the things that I'll talk about as well, I think the cost gap between the session host solution and the pooled VMs are narrowing, but there is still a definite difference in terms of cost. Ease of management, pooled VMs, while it is not as easy as sessions, it's still far simpler. We've got things like being able to roll out a collection based on one master template, being able to patch that master template, use that as a basis for patching the rest of the collection. So that way your footprint for management is significantly reduced. On the other end of the spectrum is personal VMs, very high level of personalization. You can give admin access to the users. There's one assigned VM per user. but that is going to bring in its own challenges in terms of how you deploy and manage those VMs. So with that, let's do a quick summary of the capabilities that we shipped with Windows Server 2012. The way we think about it, there are 3 key pillars for RDS in 2012. The first is around how do we simplify management, enable IT to deploy RDS much faster, automate some of the repetitive tasks like image management, etc. In 2012, the whole RDS management is built right into Server Manager. There is one set of tools. There is wizard-driven deployments. You could in less than 10 minutes have a new instance of a session nodes deployment up and running for POC sort of use cases. Claudio did an excellent session yesterday. He did a detailed walk through all the deployment options, some of the things that work great and some of the things that don't work. I'll highly recommend watching the recording of that session. He's here just to make sure that I'm not going to bullshit you all. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is around how do we deliver great value without having to install additional software or go buy expensive hardware. We've done a bunch of work. The user profile disk is one of those that I talked about it. It enables you to have a high level of personalization possible even with sessions and pooled VMs. There are other capabilities that are built right into the OS, which ensures that a few users don't overuse the system and cause a negative user experience for other users. There's a bunch of fair share technologies that are built in that ensures that bandwidth, CPU, and even disk usage is spread across all the users. And few rogue users won't be able to cause a negative impact. The other key point is around storage. Windows Server 2012 introduced a very scalable, reliable, and a flexible model for storage. You could do direct attached storage. You could do storage that is on the network with SMB 3.0 CSVs. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the subsequent slide. But we did a lot of work. We continue to work on that even for the R2 release. We've got some cool new capabilities in R2 that takes that even further. I'll talk about that in the subsequent slides. And the last pillar, in some sense the most important pillar, is the rich user experience. Because even if we solve all the problems on the infrastructure side, if users are not happy with the experience, then it's a non-starter. So we've done a bunch of work around making sure that users have a very compelling experience. The first of that was enabling RDP 8.0 and RemoteFX technologies to be able to deliver a very rich user experience on WAN networks. Sean and Benny did a very excellent deep dive this morning comparing RemoteFX, RDP 8 with that of HDX and PCORIP. If you are looking at RDS or if you have RDS, that's a must-see session. That will give you a very in-depth look into the scenarios that RDP 8 will help you solve. But the quick summary is you can now deploy all your workloads even for WAN users using RDP 8 and RemoteFX. We've also got multiple choices in terms of how you want to enable GPUs to be available for your workloads. We've got a combination of what we call as the software GPU that ships by default with Windows 8 that enables you to run most normal workloads even if they require DX11 capabilities. We've got something called RemoteFX vGPU that enables you to virtualize GPUs for your pooled VMs and your personal VM scenarios. That takes it a step further from software GPU and enables you to run some of the graphics-hungry applications in your data center and deliver those to your users. We also support physical GPUs. If you've got RDS servers and if there's a need to have a physical GPU, you could still do that. Remote desktop session node server by default doesn't use the physical GPU, but there's a group policy that you can turn on to configure it to use the physical GPU if it is present. We also enable USB redirection, enable users to use all of their locally plugged in USB devices with their sessions or pooled VMs or personal VMs. Doesn't matter what the endpoint is, all of these technologies work with either of those 3 endpoints. And we've done a bunch of work around improving the overall user experience. RDP 8 supports multi-touch. All the applications, all the new breed of applications that are designed for touch will be able to make use of the multi-touch native redirection that is built into RDP 8. With that, let's go and talk about what is new in Windows Server 2012 R2. There are a lot of improvements that we made. I'm going to highlight just some of the few and then do a little bit of demos for these. First, so we talked about 3 pillars in the previous slides. I'm going to cover. So this slide sort of summarizes what are the key improvements for the first 2 pillars, which is simplifying management and delivering great value. The first one, no-brainer, because of some of the architectural changes that we did in the graphics subsystem. We had to remove Shadow in 2012. We've heard a lot from you, more than enough, so Shadow is back. In 2012 R2. It is in fact much more improved than what was there before. I'll talk a little bit about Shadow if you have time, but a quick summary is Shadow is now back. It enables help desk to support users irrespective of what type of endpoints they're connecting to. They could be connecting to session node servers or pooled or personal VMs. It works. Users could be doing full desktop sessions or remote app sessions. Shadow works. We've also improved some of the auditing capabilities around that so that IT has better control of who is able to shadow which users, and there is an audit trail when shadowing happens. The next set of improvements is around improving the storage architecture that we delivered with 2012 R2. A couple of new cool technologies. One, tiered storage, which enables you to throw in a bunch of JBODs, just a bunch of disks, and achieve a very high, scalable, and reliable architecture with a balance between IOPS and your cost. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Similarly, deduplication is now built right into Windows Server. You can drive down your storage costs by leveraging deduplication. Specifically, if you're talking about personal VM scenarios where there are multiple copies of the same multiple copies of virtual machines, and the 70% or 80% of the VHD is going to be common across all the VMs, given that your OS and updates is going to take a significant portion. So data deduplication lets you drive down costs by reducing your storage needs. Talk about that as well. I want to quickly touch upon user profile disk. This is not new in 2012 R2, but based on talking to a bunch of you over the last 2 days, I realized that the awareness around UPD is not as high as what we would have expected. User profile disks, or UPD for short, this is a new technology that we shipped in Windows Server 2012. It basically enables you to have personalization options for RDSH and pooled VM scenarios. Remember, we said RDSH and pooled VMs are stateless. The user has no options to customize that. There's nothing that is saved if user logs off. UPDs allows you to overcome that barrier. UPD is just a virtual disk that is attached to either the RDSH or to the pooled VM instance, and the changes that the user does are saved to this disk. And log off, the disks are saved, and when the user logs back in, irrespective of which endpoint he logs into, the right UPD is attached back so that user's data and personalization is retained. Again, the backend storage options that you use for your VHD storage can be used with UPD as well. You could put it in the local disk, or you could put it in a SMB share. You could put it in a CSV or a SAN if you want to. So that is integrated with the rest of the management workflows as well. Oh, I skipped past that. So a quick note on that, UPDs work seamlessly with our other user virtualization technologies like user profile. What's happening? It works seamlessly with user profile disk. You can also use it with user environment virtualization, or UEV for short. UEV is a product that we shipped in the last year. It enables you to seamlessly roam settings across multiple devices. I think that I have an auto move set for that slide. But UPD, as I said, is restricted to your session nodes collections and pooled VM collections. If you want data to roam across these collections and go to users' native devices, you can use that UPD in combination with user experience virtualization. Now, given that this slide has been coming up again and again, let's quickly go through this. So this is the storage architecture that we shipped with Windows Server 2012. We had this new feature called storage spaces that lets you put in a bunch of JBODs together, create a virtual storage entity, and then use scale-out file servers to create a highly scalable and reliable, redundant file storage backend for your Hyper-V servers. You could have your Hyper-V servers clustered as well, so that enables a powerful mechanism for setting up your VDI infrastructure. Now, what's new? So as I said, tiered storage and data duplication are new in Server 2012 R2. Tiered storage, as the name stands, and as you might have heard in other sessions, is basically enables you to put in a bunch of disks with different sets of capabilities and cost factor to it. and achieve the right balance between IOPS requirements and cost. In the most simplest example, you could have a bunch of hard disks, spindle disks. You could have a bunch of SSD disks. Of course, SSD support more IOPS, but they're also more expensive. So using storage tiering and some of the capabilities that are built right into Windows Server, data automatically moves between the right tiers. Let's say you've got a parent VHD that is receiving a lot of hits during 9 a.m. scenarios or during the boot storm scenarios. Windows Server is going to automatically move those blocks from your HDD tier or a lower IOPS tier to a higher IOPS tier, so that you can optimize optimize the user experience. I've got a demo as well. I'll show that to you. But there is no other software or external hardware that you need to have to deploy storage tiering with Windows Server 2012 R2. You just need a bunch of disks with different capabilities, and you'll be able to set it up. Dedupe, dedupe was first introduced in 2012, but it didn't support VDI scenarios, or it didn't support the capability to dedupe a live running VM. So 2012 R2 adds that capability. Now that means you would be able to dedupe your live running VDI VMs as well. I'll show an example of this type of storage savings that you could expect with deduping. The key point for both of tiered storage tiering and deduping is they're part of Windows Server. You use one set of tools to deploy and manage those. Let me very quickly show you a demo. I've got a tiered storage setup here using storage spaces. Let me see if I can quickly walk you through it. So I've got a Lenovo 520, which has it has two SSDs, and I have an external USB attached to it. I could show it to you later. It's a regular off-the-shelf, $150 USB attached to it. What I did was, I'm not a storage guy, by the way. I'm a VDI and remote FX guy. So even for me, without a lot of experience, I was able to very easily set up. I'm sorry. Your PC can't project because something is happening. Let's do this.
Welcome to our world.
Okay, got it. So so I was telling you, right, so I've got 3 disks in here. So what I did was I went ahead and created a storage pool. It was as simple as right-clicking here, saying new storage pool, create the disks that I want to have in the storage pool. So I went ahead, I chose the SSD disk that I wanted and the USB, created a storage pool, and once I had the storage pool, I was able to go ahead and create virtual disks. So virtual disk, again, it's a simple workflow. I can walk you through it. I select the storage pool out of which I want to create a virtual disk. I can type in a name, and there is an option whether I want to create storage tiering or not. Let's do that. I'm going to say I want to create storage tiering. I'm going to say simple, no mirroring. You could choose mirroring or parity options if you want to, establish redundancy. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say fixed. Thin provision, fixed and thin is fixed, pre-allocates the capacity that you want. Thin is, as you know, is thin provisioning. The capacity is not allocated until it is used. But with tiering, you need to do a fixed provisioning. I'm going to do that. And then I can say, hey, I want 10 GB out of my SSD, and then I want 100 out of my the HDD tier. You can do that. And then automatically the virtual disk is created, and it'll be mounted as a volume. I'm not going to walk you through this, but that's simple. I mean, it's like you'll have to select the drive letter, and that's it. You'll be done. You'll have a volume created. So I've already pre-did that step before I came in. So I've got 3 volumes. I've got one volume which I'm actually using for all my demo VMs. I've got a bunch of session host servers, VMs running in there. I'm using that. But then there are 2 other volumes. I've got the tiering demo volume, which I'll shortly show you, and then I've got a volume that is also configured for dedupe. So let's quickly look at tiering in action. I've got a simple PowerShell script. By the way, I was telling you that the OS is smart enough to identify the blocks that are receiving a lot of hits, read-write hits, and then automatically moves it to the SSD tier. That's also, if you want to do it at file level, if you know that there's a particular file that you want to move to a particular tier, there's a simple PowerShell commandlet that you can use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this script. It's a basic script. It's a 10-line script. I can show it to you later. What it does is there's a file. It first pins that file to the hard disk, and then it starts a I/O simulation tool. There's a I/O simulation tool called SQL I/O. It's on Microsoft.com/download center. It starts that tool. Once it pins the file to the HDD tier, it kicks off that I/O simulation tool, and I also have perf1 running here so that we can look at the IOPS. It waits for 30 seconds so that we can get to know what the IOPS we are getting with the HTT disk. So you can say I'm getting around 120, 130, pretty much expected. It's a very basic USB disk. So let's see what happens once the file is moved to the SSD tier. So you can see that the script first marked the file for SSD tier, and then there's another commandlet that kicks off the move action. You can also schedule that. So let's see what happens. So it takes a few tenths of a second, depending on how big the file is, for it to move to the SSD tier. But once it moves to the SSD tier, you will see the IOPS gradually ramp up. You see that it has started going up from 130. And again, the key point that I want to emphasize here is, from a workload perspective, this is all completely transparent and hidden. The workload that is running, be it your Hyper-V or any other workload, is not going to be aware of the fact that things are being moved from one storage tier to the other tier. It is seamless. There is no dip in IOPS. You can only see a gradual ramp up. And in a few seconds, it will hit a few thousands of IOPS that the SSD will be able to support. There you go. I think it's speaking around 20,000 IOPS, which is what the SSD that I have supports. So cool. So this is about tiering. And by the way, so again, to emphasize, I did a manual move here. You could do that for select files that you want to, but the system is also automatic. It builds a heat map over time to know which blocks are being frequently accessed and moves those to the respective tiers based on how best to optimize IOPS. So for dedupe, I'm not going to show a detailed demo, but I've already set up a dedupe volume. And what I did was I copied a bunch of VMs. In fact, I just copied one VM and then one VHD and made multiple different copies. So I'm going to select all these files. So you can see that there's a total of 97.6 GB of storage that is being used here. But let me go back to the volume properties. You can see that this actual size on disk is less than 4 GB, right? While the actual size was 97.6, the actual size on the disk is just less than 4 GB. This is because of data deduplication. And again, this is an extreme example. None of the VHDs were different. I just took the same VHD, copied it multiple times over. But you could expect similar savings if those VHDs boot up once users start doing their personalization. So the base OS image and all the updates and applications that are there are going to be common across the disks, and those are going to be data duplicated. So with that, let's quickly move on to the other sections that I wanted to cover. So I spoke a little bit about what was available with Windows Server 2012. Quickly to summarize, we had WAN, we had GPU support that enables you to virtualize most of the workloads. We had USB redirection that enables users to use their client-side devices. We also had a bunch of improvements around improving the overall experience by having multi-touch and other capabilities. So R2 expands on the foundation that was laid by 2012. We've done a bunch of work around improving the experience for mobile form factor devices. One of the things that RDP 8 did not support was being able to dynamically add or remove monitors, or being able to do dynamic resolution changes. RDP 8.1 that is available with R2 can now do that. I could have my Slate device rotated, do a orientation change, and remote app programs or remote app sessions will dynamically adapt to the new resolution and orientation. Similarly, for remote apps, we are continuing to improve remote app compatibility. 2012 R2 now supports click-once applications. Click-once applications were not supported earlier, be it with 2012 or 2008 R2. We've also done a bunch of improvements around improving the overall user experience, primarily for Office applications. If I have time, I'll demo that as well. Again, specifically for users that are on a patchy network, such as a coffee shop network or a 3G, 4G type of network, one of the frequent things that we saw happening with the telemetry data that we get is frequent disconnects. The way the RDP 8 protocol worked, you would take upwards of 40 seconds, and depending on your latency between your backend servers and AD, it could take upwards of a minute. We've done a bunch of work around that, and the reconnect time has come down from 40 seconds to 7 seconds in 2012 R2. Finally, on the core graphics side, RemoteFX vGPU now supports DX11.1. We are also continuing to improve our codecs and delivery mechanism over WAN. This morning, Sean and Benny talked a lot about bandwidth usage. We are continuing to drive down that with the RDP 8.1 release. There are scenarios where we are seeing upwards of 40% of bandwidth savings compared to RDP 8. I'll see if I already got assigned for the time, so if I have time, I'll show a short demo of that. Fantastic. I'm going to skip these slides. So the first one that I want to quickly highlight is one of the features that a lot of customers that I talk to love is the fact that with the remote desktop store app, it is very simple for users to Okay, I got it here. It's very easy for users to discover and subscribe to IT-provided applications. A lot of you know about RD Web Access, where users will have to know the URL, they'll have to log into that web page. But with the new store application, the user just needs to know their email address. Let's do that. I've got a demo set up here, contosa.com. And I'm on a non-domain joined device. So once the user enters their email address, the app auto-discovers the backend servers based on DNS publishing. So once I enter my credentials and I authenticate, the applications that the administrator has published are pulled down. I could go ahead and tap on these applications. Let's launch Word. There you go. I've got 2012 R2 running. So one of the things that I wanted to show was the reconnect experience that I talked about. Let's do that. Let me launch a 2012 remote app as well so that we can look at the experience side by side. Meanwhile, for me to do this demo, so I'm going to simulate a WAN connection. I've got a WAN emulator running, which simulates a WAN environment. It's going to introduce 200 milliseconds latency between my client and infrastructure servers. I'm also going to go into my session host servers and introduce a bit of latency between those servers and the backend AD. So I'm going to say not much, 30 milliseconds one way, pretty typical of configurations that you'll see if you have a multi-site data center or some of these servers running in the cloud. I'm going to do that I did it for 2012 R2. Let me do that for 2012 as well. So I have both these side by side. What I'm going to do now is disconnect both. Should I say disconnect all connections? Yes. And then I've got a timer application here. Let's launch the timer app so that we can time both. Okay. Got it up here. So let's do this. Let's make sure the WAN emulator is running. And I'm going to first launch 2012 and then start timing it. This is one of the cases where during a demo I hope it will take longer, because usually you're doing a performance demo and you're praying to the demo gods that it gets done as fast as possible, but I don't mind if it takes longer. So it's not much latency, right? As I was explaining, I have like 200 either way, so it's 200 milliseconds round trip between client and RDSH, and 30 milliseconds between my session host servers and the AD, not much. So let's see how much time 2012 takes. It's 30 and counting. Okay, so let's stop this. So I think it took around 40 seconds. Let's see how much time R2 takes. I'm going to start. And hopefully this time it takes much less than that. Okay, that was around 7 seconds. So down from 40 seconds down to 7 seconds. And users that are on tablet devices where you're going to experience frequent disconnects would appreciate this, because if you're moving from one room to the other or moving from a room to a conference room, you're going to experience frequent disconnects because you go out of network and come back to network. So we talked about this. The last thing that, since we have a few more minutes, that I want to show you is the bandwidth usage savings. So what I'm going to do is launch a connection to a 8.1 virtual desktop, also to a 8 desktop, and I'm going to launch performance monitor. So I've got the performance monitor pre-configured so that we can measure the bandwidth that both of these virtual desktops are pumping out. So I'm going to start a video file on both. hopefully I've got the network in here. Oh, hold on, I need to. There's the conference room cable here, which I'm sure I'm plugged in. Let's
Got
make
it
sure.
now.
I'm good? Okay. There seems to be a bit of a delay in resolving the proxy. Again, let's do this. I'm going to stop the WAN emulation so that I think the conference LAN is slow as well. So I've got the performance monitor running. The green line is the bandwidth that is used by, the green line is the bandwidth that is used by Windows 8.1. On the blue line, which is supposed to be above the green line, is the bandwidth that is used by Windows 8. But for some reason, I don't have the video going. Yeah, there you see. So it's the same video playing. For some reason, Windows, let me try to refresh the video to get it going. But you can see that in the short moment when Windows 8 actually started playing the video, you could see the bandwidth spike up much above what Windows 8.1 is doing. By the way, to give context, if I had time, I would have shown Windows 7 on side-by-side as well. We had significant bandwidth reductions compared to Windows 7, which is basically RDP 7. We had up to 90% of bandwidth savings, and RDP 8.1 delivers further 40% savings on top of what you had in RDP 8.0. So the bandwidth savings also applies to a lot of other scenarios as well, such as rich text applications or other multimedia applications. So you'll see these improvements across the board. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason to sort of summarize. Let's do it.
Let me just grab this part.
Yeah,
So thanks a lot. So basically, our goal here was to talk about what we consider the people-centric IT. If you take a look at our management products, we don't just focus on mobile device management as a separate product with Intune, for example. Combine everything together with your existing infrastructure if you have ConfigMan. And really, instead of having point solution on focusing on mobile devices versus PCs, really managing everything together as one part of that layer, but then also focusing on application and data access and protection. And then finally, some of the improvements that we're making, not only to help efficiency on your side, but also the user experience on your user side to keep you as productive as well as the end users productive as well. So we have a booth. We look forward to talking with you there to answer any more of your questions. Thanks a lot for your time. Enjoy the rest of your time and safe travels home.
And